The instant I stepped into the ballroom, I heard the comment. Sloane Whitmore, my brother's flawless fiancée, was leaning toward her bridesmaids, a champagne flute balanced in her perfectly manicured hand. Her whisper was deliberate, pitched just loud enough to travel. Oh, wonderful. The smelly country girl showed up. Her friends laughed, dressed head to toe in designer gowns. Sloane didn't even turn to look at me. I wasn't worth the effort. To her, I was just an eyesore from a small town, dropped into her carefully curated engagement party to ruin the look. What Sloane didn't realize, what no one in that room realized, was that I had signed the deed to this hotel 3 years earlier. The Monarch Hotel belonged to me. Every chandelier above her head, every piece of silverware in her place setting, every inch of Italian marble beneath her expensive heels was my property. And before the night was over, that single whisper would cost her far more than she imagined. My name is Bethany Burns. I'm 31 years old, raised in Millbrook, Pennsylvania, a town so small that our biggest traffic problem happened when Mr. Henderson's cows wandered onto Main Street and blocked it for 3 hours. I left when I was 18 and never truly went back. Not because I disliked my hometown, but because my family made it clear there was no real space for me there. I have an older brother, Garrett, the golden child, the son who never failed. Growing up, everything I did was compared to him, and I never measured up. If I earned an A, Garrett earned an A+. If I made the softball team, Garrett was the captain. My mother, Patricia, had a way of looking at me that made me feel unfinished, like a rough draft, while Garrett was treated as the final version. So I left. One suitcase, a bus ticket to the city, $200, and a firm refusal to give up. Everyone back home assumed I was struggling. They imagined me in a cramped apartment living on instant noodles, which, for the first 2 years, was accurate. What they didn't know was that I had taken a job as a cleaning staff member at a small boutique hotel. That job changed everything. I paid attention. I learned. I observed how the business worked. I moved up step by step, from housekeeping to front desk, then assistant manager, and beyond. I saved carefully, invested wisely, made calculated decisions, and took risks when they made sense. By 28, I owned my first property. By 30, I owned 3. Now, at 31, I run Birch Hospitality, a company with 6 boutique hotels across the East Coast. The Monarch is my flagship, the one I'm most proud of. Building something from nothing teaches you restraint. You learn to stay quiet. You realize that being underestimated can be an advantage. So I never corrected my family's assumptions. They never asked. To them, I was still the younger sister barely getting by, forever trailing behind Garrett and his middle management job at an insurance firm. The irony was hard to ignore. The invitation to Garrett's engagement party arrived at the last minute. No surprise there. Most likely my mother's idea, a courtesy invite so she could tell her friends the entire family attended. I almost declined. But something pushed me to come. Curiosity, perhaps. Or a small, stubborn hope that something had changed. It hadn't. I stood at the entrance of my own hotel wearing jeans and my favorite boots, my hair still faintly carrying the scent of the countryside. I had driven through Millbrook on the way just to remind myself where I started. My outfit probably cost more than everything Sloane was wearing combined, though you'd never guess it. Real money doesn't announce itself. And while you can take a girl out of the farm doesn't always leave her, though the farm girl's money can certainly go straight to the bank. Across the room, my mother was surrounded by friends, clearly praising Garrett's engagement and his bright future. Garrett stood beside Sloane, looking like someone convinced he'd won big. He had no idea how fragile that belief was. Sloane finally glanced in my direction, her smile thin and sharp. To her, I was still just a problem. An unwanted detail in an otherwise perfect night. That suited me. Let them think I was irrelevant. I learned long ago that effective revenge doesn't make noise. It waits. It allows people to undermine themselves while they're too busy looking down to notice what's happening. I returned Sloane's smile, walked to the bar, and ordered a drink. My staff knew better than to acknowledge me. Wesley Crane, my general manager, met my eyes from across the room and gave a brief nod. Everything was running as planned. Everything was fine. For now. Because in roughly 3 hours, Sloane Whitmore was going to learn a simple lesson. Never underestimate the country girl. especially when she owns the ground beneath your feet. Delilah was slim and carefully styled, covered in jewelry that caught the light with every small movement. On the surface, they looked affluent and behaved the part, yet something felt slightly wrong, like a painting hung just off center. I couldn't identify it yet, but I knew I would. Garrett eventually noticed me and walked over. My older brother, 3 years ahead of me in age, still looked at me the same way he had when we were kids, as an irritating tag-along. He said he was glad I came, though his tone suggested he hadn't really noticed my absence or presence. He asked whether I'd met Sloane and went on about how wonderful she was. I said I'd seen her and left it at that. He nodded, already distracted, scanning the room for other guests. Some patterns never change. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. He mentioned that Mom had given Sloane Grandma's necklace as an engagement gift. Wasn't that generous of her? He said, adding that Sloane absolutely loved it. The room seemed to lose its air. Grandma's necklace, the antique pendant she had promised to me before she passed. She had held my hand and told me it was meant for me because I was her dreamer, her fighter, the one she believed would build something meaningful. My mother had been there when Grandma said it. She knew, and she still gave it away. I looked across the room and saw it immediately, resting against Sloane's neck as if it belonged there. My inheritance. My memory. Catching the chandelier light as Sloane laughed. The music suddenly became unbearably loud, vibrating through my teeth. If I wanted that feeling, I could have gone to the dentist and at least walked away with a free toothbrush. I excused myself from Garrett and headed toward the restroom, needing space to breathe. That was when I passed Franklin Whitmore in the hallway. His phone was pressed to his ear, his face tense. He didn't notice me. I overheard him say they needed this wedding to go through and that the Burns family had enough money to cover their situation. After a pause, he added they just had to get through the ceremony. Then everything would be fine. He ended the call and walked back toward the party, his practiced smile sliding back into place. I stood there, frozen. Grandma's necklace faded from my thoughts, replaced by something far more concerning. The Burns family had money? What money? My parents had a comfortable house, but I knew there was a second mortgage, one I had quietly been paying down for 4 years. Garrett had a steady job, nothing more. There was no hidden wealth. So why did Franklin believe there was? And what exactly needed covering? For the next hour, I watched the Whitmores closely. Every handshake, every smile, every carefully timed laugh. Now that I knew something was wrong, the cracks were obvious. Franklin checked his phone constantly, his jaw tightening each time. Delilah's jewelry was impressive, yet she touched it often, almost nervously. And Sloane, perfect, polished Sloane, had a hunger in her eyes that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with need. Then it clicked. For 4 years, I'd been sending money to my parents anonymously through Birch Hospitality. Mortgage payments, utilities, medical bills. When my father needed knee surgery, I covered it quietly. I never attached my name. I didn't want praise or questions, just distance. My parents didn't know it was me, and apparently my mother had decided it must be Garrett. Of course she did. In her version of reality, her golden son was the secret provider, the successful child she always believed in. I could almost hear her bragging about Garrett's generosity, his sacrifices. My money, my effort, his credit. The irony was almost impressive. The Whitmores had done their homework. A nice house with no visible financial strain, Patricia boasting about her son's success, a family that looked quietly wealthy. They saw Garrett and moved in, like predators sensing weakness. But their plan had a flaw. The money wasn't Garrett's. There was no fortune. They were chasing an illusion. And when the truth came out, my family would be left dealing with the damage, unless someone intervened. I found Wesley Crane near the service entrance, clipboard in hand, supervising the catering team. When he saw me, his professional expression softened. He asked if everything was okay, calling me Ms. Burns before I stopped him with a look. He corrected himself and used my first name. I asked for a favor, background information on the Whitmore family. Business records, articles, anything available. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded and pulled out his phone. That's why I trusted him. I returned to the party, trying to appear normal, which was becoming increasingly difficult. That's when Sloane approached. She appeared beside me effortlessly, dressed like a high-end apparition, smiling sweetly enough to be dangerous. She suggested we talk privately and placed a familiar hand on my arm, guiding me toward a quiet corner near the restrooms. The moment we were out of earshot, her smile disappeared. She told me she knew about me, that I sent money home every month, playing the dutiful daughter from afar. What confused her, she said, was why someone who could barely afford their own apartment would do that for a family that didn't even like them. I kept my face neutral. She went on, suggesting I must be trying to buy their affection, to prove my value. She called it pathetic. Leaning closer, she said Garrett had told her everything. How I was jealous, how I couldn't stand not being the favorite, how the family only tolerated me out of pity. Her smile returned, sharper than before. She said she was marrying Garrett, joining this family, and thought it would be best if I stayed away. Nobody would miss me, she added, calling me dead weight before patting my arm and walking off. I stood there, absorbing it. Sloane thought I was broke. She believed Garrett was the provider. She had no idea who she was talking to. It was like someone boasting about a rental car to the owner of the dealership. If arrogance burned calories, Sloane Whitmore wouldn't exist. Wesley returned, startling me. He handed me a folder, his face pale. He said I needed to see it. The Whitmores weren't just in debt. They were under investigation for fraud. I opened the folder right there. Financial records, court documents, news articles. Each page made my stomach turn colder. Their so-called empire was built on lies and borrowed money. They were months away from bankruptcy and federal scrutiny. This wedding wasn't about love. It was an exit plan. I took the folder to my car in the parking garage to read in private. The flickering lights felt fitting. The truth was ugly. Franklin and Delilah Whitmore had been running what amounted to a Ponzi scheme for years, selling fake or inflated developments, paying early investors with later funds. But the structure was collapsing. Auditors were closing in. Investigators were already involved. They needed a way out. Fast. Enter Garrett. A family that looked wealthy. A marriage that offered credibility, or at least cover when everything fell apart. They likely planned to drain whatever assets they could before disappearing. What they didn't know was that there were no assets. The only real money came from me, and I could cut it off instantly. When the truth surfaced, they would abandon Garrett immediately, leaving him devastated and my parents embarrassed. Part of me wanted to let it happen. Let them face the consequences. Let my mother feel what it was like to give something precious away without thought. Let my brother experience being disposable. But I couldn't. They were still my family. Garrett was still the boy who taught me to ride a bike. My mother was still the woman who stayed up with me when I was sick, even if she later forgot my worth. Family is complicated. You can love people and resent them at the same time. You can protect them even when they've hurt you deeply. So I made a choice. I would expose the Whitmores. I would protect my family from a disaster they didn't see coming, and I would do it on my terms. I called my lawyer, Rebecca Thornton. She answered on the second ring despite it being 8 at night, which is exactly why I paid her well. I explained the situation and asked how quickly she could verify what I'd found. She said she'd have confirmation. Within the hour, Rebecca confirmed it. Next, I called Naomi Delaney, a forensic accountant I'd worked with during a difficult acquisition 2 years earlier. Naomi was exceptional with numbers, the kind of expert who could glance at a spreadsheet and tell you what someone had for breakfast. I sent her photos of the key documents and asked her to dig deeper. If you're enjoying this story, take a second to leave a like and a comment. It truly helps, and I appreciate every bit of support. Now, back to Bethany. Naomi called me 40 minutes later. Her voice carried the sharp excitement of someone who had uncovered something significant. She confirmed my suspicion. It was a textbook Ponzi scheme. But then she added something else. She'd searched the Whitmore name across other states and found a match in Arizona from 3 years earlier. Same structure. Same fraud. Different identities. She asked if I was ready. I said I was. The bride's real name wasn't Sloane Whitmore. It was Sandra Williams. The people posing as her parents weren't related to her at all. They were partners in a long-running scam. Naomi believed they'd been doing this for at least a decade, changing names, locations, and targets. I sat in my car with the folder on my lap and laughed. I couldn't help it. These people had more identities than most actors have past roles. Sandra today, Sloane tonight, and someone else tomorrow. My phone buzzed. A text from Garrett. He wanted to talk. He said something about Sloane didn't feel right. I checked the time. 5 minutes to 9. Franklin Whitmore's scheduled toast. Too late, brother. But at least he was finally noticing the cracks. I stepped out of the car and headed back toward the hotel. The warm night air followed me inside. Somewhere beyond those doors, a con artist in a white dress was about to face reality. I re-entered the Monarch with a completely different presence. Before, I'd been invisible, the overlooked sister. Now, I was focused. Wesley met me near the service entrance, concern evident on his face. He said he'd been watching the Whitmores, and something felt wrong. Franklin had made several tense phone calls in the past hour. I told Wesley to prepare the AV system. During Franklin's toast, the guests were going to see a presentation they wouldn't forget. I handed him a USB drive containing scanned court records, financial statements, photos of Sandra under her real name, and documentation spanning 10 years of deception. I instructed him to put everything on the screens when the toast began. Wesley nodded, a slight smile forming, and headed for the control room. Rebecca texted again. She confirmed the federal investigation and told me she'd contacted Agent Carla Reeves, who had been tracking the Whitmores for months. The team would be outside the hotel by 9:15, ready to move once everything went public. The plan was set. I positioned myself at the back of the ballroom. Sloane was circulating, smiling like nothing was wrong. Garrett stood beside her, unaware his life was about to unravel. My mother chatted with Delilah, two women connected only by their talent for making me feel small. At 8:52, my phone buzzed again. Garrett. He said Franklin's behavior bothered him. What Sloane avoided questions about her past. He wondered if he was imagining things. I stared at the message. Warning him now could ruin everything. I told him we'd talk after the toast and asked him to wait. At 8:56, Franklin adjusted his tie and stepped toward the stage. Confident again, unaware. I thought of Sloane's words. Dead weight, nobody, country girl. People who underestimate you never see you coming. At 8:59, Franklin took the microphone. The music faded. Guests raised their glasses. Wesley and I locked eyes. He gave a small nod. The screens behind the stage still showed smiling photos of Garrett and Sloane. Franklin began his speech, praising family and legacy, calling Sloane his daughter, a lie built on another lie. He raised his glass. To love, to family, to forever. I sent Wesley one word, now. The screens changed. The photos vanished, replaced by an official court document from Arizona. Fraud investigation, 3 years old. A name appeared. Sandra Williams. Murmurs spread. Franklin's face drained of color. He stammered about a mistake and shouted for someone to fix the system. But the documents kept coming. Financial trails, news articles, photos of Sandra under previous identities. Sloane stood frozen, her glass shaking. Garrett looked between her and the screens, understanding finally setting in. Franklin tried to leave. Security blocked him. I stepped forward through the crowd. Wesley's voice filled the room, introducing me as the owner of the Monarch Hotel and CEO of Birch Hospitality. Silence followed. My mother went pale. Garrett stared. I took the microphone. I explained who the Whitmores really were, that their wealth was stolen, their empire fabricated, and that Sloane Whitmore was actually Sandra Williams, a career con artist. Sloane screamed that I was lying. I calmly mentioned the federal investigation, the arrest warrants, and the agents waiting outside. Right on cue, the doors opened. Agent Reeves and her team entered. Franklin was arrested. Delilah cried. Sloane pleaded with Garrett. After a long moment, Garrett stepped away from her. He said he didn't know who she was. Security restrained her as she lunged at me, screaming. I leaned in and reminded her that the country girl owned the room and paid everyone escorting her out. Once they were gone, I told the guests the food was already paid for and the bar would remain open. Nervous laughter followed. The DJ resumed playing. The next hour felt unreal. The Whitmores were taken away. Inside, guests processed what they'd witnessed. Garrett found me by the bar and asked how I knew. I told him I listened and observed. He apologized. I accepted it as a beginning. My mother approached next. I showed her the records, 4 years of payments, all from me. She cried, truly cried, and said my name like it was new. Garrett later returned Grandma's necklace to me. It felt right in my hand. 3 weeks later, I sat in my office overlooking the city. The Whitmores were finished. The case made headlines briefly. One headline called me the stinky country girl who owned the room. I framed it. Garrett visited. We talked, really talked for the first time. My mother began therapy. Slowly, things started to change. This morning, during a business breakfast, a young woman was mocked for not fitting in. I stood, introduced her as the Birch Hospitality Scholarship recipient, and seated her with the investors. I told her to remember that people who build the most meaningful things often start with very little. Later, I stood in the hotel lobby watching guests pass through, unaware of who made it all possible. That was fine. People will always try to make you feel small because of where you started. Let them. While they're busy looking down, they won't see you rise. I learned that lesson long ago. The stinky country girl? She smelled success coming from miles away,